It starts with a date, December the 19th, a day that on the surface looks like any other. But beneath that unassuming winter sky, deep in the raw telemetry of telescopes and spaceborne observatories, something peculiar has been building. A countdown, almost one that NASA isn't broadcasting on the evening news, but which is quietly lighting up private channels among astrophysicists, orbital dynamicists, and systems risk analysts. Because if the numbers are right, and they usually are, then something critical happens on December 19th, and it involves 3I Atlas. 3I Atlas, the so-called interstellar object that has already violated every known rule of cometary behavior, is poised to intersect a gravitational node of the solar system so precise, so exquisitely calculated, that even seasoned astronomers are stunned into silence, not by fear, by pattern, by the kind of pattern that doesn't occur naturally, not at this scale, not with this timing. Its current trajectory, refined to within 1/100th of a kilometer, is set to pass through what's known as a resonance sheath, a mathematically predicted region of gravitational harmony between Earth, Mars, and Jupiter, and it does so on December 19th. The impossibility stack begins here. First, the alignment itself is a once-in-3-century event. Second, the object's velocity profile appears to decelerate in micro-intervals, a maneuver no known natural object can achieve without propulsion. And third, the timing. The sheath lasts 36 hours. Atlas hits dead center, 6 hours after its midpoint stabilizes. That kind of timing doesn't come from luck. It comes from control. What if this isn't a mistake? What if this was the moment all along? What if December 19th isn't when we discover something, but when something finally activates? In Babylonian myth, Nibiru was said to return every 36 centuries to reshape the heavens. It came from Sagittarius, just like this. What does that make us? Witnesses, test subjects, unwilling participants in a cosmic experiment that's finally reached its critical phase. You would think the solar system is a chaotic place, asteroids drifting, comets tumbling, planets spinning with no greater logic than Newton's laws and celestial inertia. But the deeper we look, the more we discover that space is anything but random. Hidden within its vast emptiness are subtle harmonies, quiet rhythms, configurations that hum like chords held across millennia. And if you're patient, if you look long enough, those harmonies begin to reveal themselves. Some call them Lagrange points. Some call them resonance patterns. But a few, the ones buried deepest in the data, are called sheath nodes. December 19th is the date when 3I Atlas intersects one of these sheath nodes, but not just any. This one is a trinary harmonic resonance between Earth, Mars, and Jupiter, a location in space where the tug-of-war between 3 gravitational fields creates a momentary corridor of perfect balance. Think of it like a tide pool formed at the convergence of 3 colliding waves, briefly still, briefly silent, then gone. No natural object should be able to predict, let alone target, such a node. These regions are so narrow and fleeting that even spacecraft struggle to align with them, despite supercomputers and precision burns. But 3I Atlas is not struggling. It is gliding, adjusting, recalculating in small, smooth increments. Observatories in Chile, Hawaii, and South Africa have all confirmed micro-changes in its trajectory over the last 17 days. Changes that correct for perturbations from solar wind, ion drift, and tidal interference. That is not random behavior. That is adaptation. At first, analysts at the European Space Agency assumed it was a data processing error, so they recalibrated. Then they assumed an outgassing event had nudged the comet, and so they scanned for gas signatures. Nothing. The spectral data showed silence. No carbon monoxide bloom, no water vapor, no typical sublimation tail, just a dim, slow-turning object adjusting itself without apparent energy loss. NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory flagged the behavior as consistent with low-thrust autonomous correction. Their wording was careful. Not propulsion, not alien, just consistent with. But the phrasing didn't stop the private whispers, especially when the object's path converged with a node that wasn't even known to exist until 6 years ago. That's right. The resonance sheath at these coordinates wasn't discovered until 2019, when AI-enhanced orbital modeling revealed a 3-body harmonic with a lifespan of under 2 days. December 19th marks the only time this node will be active within the next 400 years, and 3i Atlas is aiming directly at it. Now consider this. How would an object originating from interstellar space, moving at tens of kilometers per second, happen to encounter such a fleeting and precise alignment? The odds are not just low, they are non-existent, unless the object knew the alignment would occur, unless the object was programmed or programmed itself to arrive exactly when it did. It's easy to dismiss this as overreach. Confirmation bias, a pattern-seeking species, inventing meaning where none exists. But that excuse wears thin when you see the trajectory overlays, when you realize that every adjustment 3i Atlas has made since it entered the solar system bends it closer to the node, not by accident, by choice. The question then becomes, why? Why aim for this node? What happens when it gets there? One theory comes from Dr. Kelsey Ramani, a computational astrophysicist at MIT. She suggests that the resonance sheath may serve as a lens point, a gravitationally quiet region ideal for signal transmission or energy capture. In simpler terms, a switchboard, a place where cosmic calls can be placed without distortion. Another theory, offered by ESA's Dr. Marek Lundvik, posits that these nodes may allow for momentary mass cancellation through synchronized field interference. That is, if you knew how, you could use the resonance to shed or absorb momentum, allowing an object to change states or even functions without expending traditional energy. And that opens up a far more troubling possibility, that the object is not merely moving through this node, it is activating there. The term activation implies function, mechanism, purpose, but no one can say what that purpose is. Not yet. All we have are guesses, and those guesses grow more ominous by the day, because as the object nears the sheath, its brightness has remained stable, but its shape has begun to change. Data from the Subaru telescope in Mauna Kea shows a hardening of structure, not a melt or decay, but a crystallization of its outer shell, like armor, forming in response to a countdown. The leading edge of the object now reflects light differently than the trailing edge. One side sharpens, the other drags. That is not the behavior of a chunk of ice. That is the behavior of a system preparing to do something. We've also picked up low-frequency emissions barely above the cosmic background noise. They fluctuate in a 16.3-second loop, repeating every hour. only at certain approach angles. They could be random, or they could be a handshake protocol, the kind used by autonomous systems to confirm location and timing before executing a command. 16.3 seconds. Repeating. Near the sheath node, ask yourself, if this was just a comet, why would it need to check its position? Why would it prepare itself only once it reached a mathematically unique corridor of space that human beings only discovered in the last half-decade? This is not the path of a rock on a blind journey. This is the course of a system arriving at a destination. And December 19th isn't an accident. It is a deadline. By now, every major observatory has logged it. The pulse, a whisper in the low-frequency spectrum that cycles every 16.3 seconds. So faint, it's nearly indistinguishable from background radiation. If it weren't for the timing precise, unwavering, persistent, it would have been ignored, just another piece of the static fog. But on October 29th, it sharpened, and then it looped. 16.3 seconds, then silence, then 16.3 again. Not loud, not modulated, just consistent. At first, no one knew where it came from. The pulse was too low for traditional optical tracking, too faint for normal radio antennas. But one team based in Western Australia, operating under the Square Kilometre Array precursor array, noticed something uncanny. When they aimed their instruments toward the exact sky coordinates of 3I Atlas, the pulse amplitude increased. When they looked away, it faded. Repeated observations confirmed it. Whatever this signal was, it was coming from the direction of 3I Atlas. NASA tried to classify it as an anomaly of instrumentation, geometric interference, ground echo, the usual fallback when something doesn't match the models. But Dr. Mei-Lin Cho from Caltech's Center for Interplanetary Systems wasn't convinced. She'd seen this kind of cycling before, not in nature, in systems, mechanical systems. There's a concept in engineering called heartbeat telemetry. It's used in spacecraft to confirm continued function, even when no commands are being sent. A small pulse, simple, repetitive, serves as a beacon. It says, "I'm still here. I'm still working. I am awaiting instructions." And that's what made Cho's analysis so troubling. Because if the pulse were thermal in origin, it would have drifted. If it were electromagnetic noise from the solar wind, it would have warped under magnetic turbulence. If it were a cosmic ray echo or an artifact of Earth's ionosphere, it would not repeat at exactly 16.3 seconds, with zero deviation over the span of 6 Earth days. Only one known category of emitter does that: artificial systems with internal timing. But here's where the numbers get stranger. The frequency at which the signal arrives, approximately 1.4 MHz, is just above the hydrogen line, the default hailing frequency for interstellar contact attempts, both fictional and scientific. The same range the Arecibo message used, the same band SETI has monitored since the 1970s. Coincidence? Maybe. But stack that on top of the resonance node convergence, the lack of outgassing behavior, and the mass-to-reflection ratio anomalies, and you're left with more than a shrug. You're left with intention. The pulse isn't just mechanical. It's timed to the object's orientation relative to Earth. As Atlas spins roughly once every 32 hours, it enters a phase angle where Earth receives the signal strongest. That window is only 90 minutes wide. The pulse increases by a factor of 10 during that time, and then fades again. So now, The assumption among the more daring analysts is this: we are not just observing 3i Atlas, it is observing us, not continuously, not overtly, but in a way that suggests awareness, or at least calibration. Every signal loop it emits corresponds to a position check, a reference lock, as if it's triangulating our location using the solar system's background radiation, then refining its course as it nears the node. But the mystery deepens when you consider the pulse isn't alone. On November 6th, the Indian Space Research Organization's Aryabhata array picked up a second pattern higher frequency, buried in noise. This one cycles every 7.2 minutes. A harmonic of the 16-second signal? Perhaps, but it's offset, meaning it doesn't peak at the same intervals. Instead, it seems to interact with the primary signal constructively at times, destructively at others, like two tuning forks vibrating at almost, but not quite the same pitch. Dr. Emil Halvorsen from the University of Oslo likened it to a nested handshake protocol, a two-stage ping. First, the beacon confirms location. Then, a query is sent. But a query to what? If Atlas is alone, then the second signal makes no sense, unless it's waiting for a response from something else. And that's where the silence becomes its own kind of scream. Because if Atlas is sending, but nothing is receiving, what does that mean? Did the intended recipient never arrive? Was it destroyed? Or are we intercepting a conversation that was never meant for us? This is where historical patterns come into play. In the 1970s, during early SETI experiments, Carl Sagan once warned that we might misinterpret alien signals as natural phenomena simply because we don't know what to look for. We could be bathing in interstellar messages, he wrote, and mistake them for thermal noise. It's metronome, but what if we finally noticed one? The 16.3-second pulse has now been detected across 7 observatories. It is directional, it is stable, and it is intensifying as Atlas nears the resonance sheath, which raises another question. Is the node merely a navigational waypoint, or is it the antenna? Consider this. Gravitational nodes bend space-time, ever so slightly, but enough to refract not just matter, but waves, radio, light, even thought, if such a thing had mass. If a sufficiently advanced system knew how to exploit these bends, it could turn the node into a relay station, a lighthouse, a translator, or worse, a trigger, because if the node activates something, we may not get a second chance to interpret the result. The pulse could be a key, a countdown, a query, or an ancient bootloader, and we have no idea what language it's written in. So here we are, decoding a whisper in the dark, 16.3 seconds, again and again, the sound of something waiting, not for us, but for alignment, for context, for the exact arrangement of time and gravity and presence. December 19th isn't about arrival. It might be about permission. Long before radar arrays and orbital plots, before infrared spectroscopy and machine-learned orbital predictions, there were stories. Stories of stars that moved the wrong way, of glowing visitors that streaked across the night sky, then vanished, of voices in the firmament, too slow to be meteors, too silent to be storms. The ancient Maya tracked them. So did the Babylonian priests. And once every few centuries, the records etched in obsidian tablets or scratched into parchment scrolls describe something eerie. Something that passed through the sky not like a comet, but like a returning messenger, silent, green, timed. December 19th is when 3I Atlas enters the resonant sheath. But it is not the first time such a crossing has been suspected. There is a fragment preserved in the Library of Alexandria before its destruction, quoted by the Greek historian Eratosthenes in 230 BCE. It speaks of a wandering star that paused above the path of Ares and Kronos before disappearing behind the blazing god. Scholars now believe this poetic imagery referred to an object passing between the orbital paths of Mars, Jupiter, right where the resonant sheath now forms. Coincidence? Possibly. But then, in 1421, during the Ming Dynasty, a record appears in the Tianwen-lu, the Book of Celestial Patterns. It describes a green eye above the western horizon, pulsing in silence, unmoving for 6 nights, which then vanished as the heavens shook in quiet. Astronomers of the time thought it an omen, a heavenly warning. What we now realize is this: the described event took place during an alignment of Earth, Mars, and Jupiter, nearly identical to the one approaching this December. But perhaps the most chilling account comes from the winter of 1683. In the Royal Society's journal Philosophical Transactions, an English observer named Charles Kerwin describes a silent clock in the sky, visible through a crude telescope, as a faint, greenish object, round but not firm in shape, glinting as though shielded. He claimed it returned to the same position every 17 seconds. He called it the eye of the sleeper. His observation was dismissed as delusional until, more than 300 years later, the same region of space would be scanned by the Very Large Array in New Mexico and produce a low-frequency pulse once every 16.3 seconds, almost a match. But what makes these echoes more than myth is what they imply: that this is not a new phenomenon, that 3I Atlas or something like it has passed this way before and left no trace, no debris field, no impact crater, no melted polar cap or chemical trail in the ionosphere, just silence, followed by questions, and a brief spike in strange behaviors. There are written accounts in 1683 of dogs howling at dusk, livestock refusing to eat, entire villages reporting the wrong stars in the sky. Anecdotal, yes, but recurring, because in 1421, the same stories appear in China: birds flying in circles, fishermen refusing to sail, a temple that trembled during the green eye's passing. Each account by itself means nothing, but together they form a mosaic, a whispering continuity that suggests we may be under observation, not for the first time, but for the latest. And still, the sky remains mostly silent, except for that one sound, 16.3 seconds, again and again. Historians now speculate that ancient architects may have understood more than we give them credit for. The alignment of temples in Angkor Wat, the pyramids of Giza, the Hopi petroglyph spirals in Arizona, all show recurring astronomical motifs tied to trinary planetary arrangements, not just solstices, not just equinoxes, but events like the one we face now, convergences of Earth, Mars, and Jupiter. Some believe these alignments were used to tune sacred spaces, to focus observation, or channel awareness. Others whisper that they were warnings, because each time the alignment happens, something strange approaches. In Mesopotamian myth, there is the figure of Enlil, a god of storms, who travels in a shining boat that glows green when the air is quietest. In Norse cosmology, there is Skirl, the devourer of the sun, who races across the sky and can only be seen in the twilight before Ragnarok. And in Mayan tradition, there is Kawil, whose scepter holds a bolt of lightning shaped like a spiral, descending from the sky with purpose. Why do these stories echo each other across cultures and continents? Why the green glow? Why the spiral descent? Why the timing? 3i Atlas is not acting like a comet. It is not tumbling. It is not shearing. It is aligning. It is emitting. It is arriving. And history suggests that the arrival may be part of a cycle, a long, slow pattern, only visible when you stretch your view across centuries. But we're no longer watching with naked eyes. We're using infrared telescopes, deep radar, heliosphere monitors, and low-orbit satellites. And what we're seeing now is far stranger. The signal is intensifying, the trajectory is narrowing, and the data models now show a 99.7% chance that Atlas will enter the sheath corridor within less than 100 kilometers of the node's gravitational center. That level of precision isn't coincidence, it's choreography. And if something like this has happened before, then our ancestors may have been trying to warn us, not of doom, not of contact, but of a quiet moment, one we might mistake for stillness when everything changes, and we're too busy looking at the surface to notice the doorway underneath. December 19th is not the beginning, it is the return. Zoom out far enough, and even the solar system starts to feel small. A dust mote orbiting a yellow star, halfway out on a spiral arm of the Milky Way. From this vantage point, where you can barely distinguish Earth from Mars, where Jupiter's storms are just pale ripples, you start to see patterns that are impossible to detect up close. Vectors, motions, echoes of things too large for human instinct to grasp. And somewhere in that perspective, 3i Atlas becomes something else. Not a comet, not even a visitor, a function. You see, natural comets follow gradients of energy. They move along thermodynamic paths, outgassing when heated, fragmenting when spun too fast, breaking when nudged by gravity. But 3i Atlas defies that script. It maintains coherence, it adapts course, and most alarmingly, it avoids energy loss. Even now, as it approaches the critical resonance sheath, its reflected albedo remains fixed. That is, the way it bounces sunlight is unnaturally stable. No tumble, no flare, just a controlled surface geometry. NASA's Dawn mission, before it ended, catalogued dozens of asteroids with irregular reflectivity, bright sides, dark craters, chaotic shifts. Atlas is none of those. Its signature behaves more like polished alloy than rock, and that's the detail that has people whispering. Because if it's not ice and dust, if it's not a dirty snowball, but instead a shell, a reflective casing, a vessel, then the object must be hollow, or worse, inhabited. That brings us to a theory once relegated to fringe thinkers and speculative fiction, that interstellar space may be littered not with random objects, but with probes, silent watchers, moving slowly, powered by mechanisms we don't understand. What the legendary astrophysicist Freeman Dyson called artifacts of distant intention. In 1960, he wrote that advanced civilizations might leave behind inert machines, dormant scouts, designed to wake only when something matched their criteria: a resonance, a frequency, a signal, or a gravity pattern, like the one unfolding on December 19th. The idea seemed laughable then. But now, Atlas is exhibiting behavior that eerily mirrors Dyson's checklist: long-term trajectory, stability, autonomous course correction, signal emission, surface hardening, and, crucially, a lack of communication in any conventional spectrum. Because maybe it isn't here to talk. Maybe it's here to listen. Or worse, maybe it's here to confirm. We have already sent signals out. The Voyager probes carry golden records. Arecibo beamed a pixelated greeting toward Messier 13 in the 1,970 seconds. More recently, amateur astronomers have sent radio pulses toward potentially habitable stars, all done with hope, with trust. But what if those signals didn't reach alien civilizations? What if they triggered systems already within range? And what if Atlas is one of them? There is a chilling possibility here, one buried deep in cosmic statistics. It is called the Sentinel hypothesis. It proposes that any intelligent life that survives long enough to spread will inevitably seed the galaxy with monitoring systems, not to conquer, not to colonize, but to observe, to log who crosses certain thresholds: nuclear capability, radio emissions, spaceflight, interplanetary travel. Each of these thresholds acts like a flare in the dark, and we have passed all of them. Atlas may not be a ship in the traditional sense. It may be a node, a black box, a mechanism that wakes only when certain signals align. And now, as it closes in on the resonance sheath, a natural amplifier, a gravitational throat, it begins to spin, not erratically, purposefully. The kind of motion you'd expect from a system aligning itself to something vast, like a satellite dish, tuning itself to a cosmic address. But if it's receiving, from whom or from where? There are regions in space where signals can lie dormant for millennia, only to converge in a flash of alignment, not unlike ripples in a pond meeting at a central point. If Atlas is the receiver, then the sheath may be the moment those ripples converge, and the message, if there is one, may not be meant for us at all. We are incidental. We are background noise. But here's the twist. Our instruments are too sensitive now. We cannot not notice. And that means, for the first time in our planetary history, humanity is not merely the observed. We are the observer who realizes the experiment might include us. From this cosmic vantage point, you begin to see the implications. If 3I Atlas is part of a larger system, if there are others like it, then the galaxy may be a quiet network, not of civilizations shouting across the stars, but of devices quietly verifying that intelligent life has emerged. And we've just tripped the wire. As of today, the European Southern Observatory reports that Atlas is within 4.2 million kilometers of the resonance corridor. Its approach is unbroken, no tail, no fragmentation, just a slow tightening of orbit, like a lock clicking into place. It is still pulsing, 16.3 seconds. Every time, the sky remains silent, but only for now. And as December 19th looms, a new question replaces the old. It's no longer, what is it? It's, what happens when it finishes listening? The truth is, we were never supposed to see this. Not yet. Not with such clarity. The idea that something, anything, could move with intention through our solar system, and choose not to interact, not to respond, but to simply be there, that idea unravels the very fabric of our assumptions. For centuries, we believed that anything intelligent enough to travel the stars would want to talk, to reveal itself, to share knowledge or deliver warnings or open a cosmic conversation. But what if the opposite is true? What if they already said what they needed to say, and 3i Atlas is simply the answer? It's a hard thing to accept that we might not be the subject of the story, that something could arrive and not center us, not care about our hopes or fears or telescopes, that it could pass by like a deep-sea creature near a glass diving bell, aware of the lights inside, but disinterested, or worse, uncertain if we are even alive. There's a painful humility in realizing that our greatest achievement, building machines that can watch the stars, is still not enough to be noticed. But maybe, just maybe, being noticed isn't the goal. That brings us to a deeply unsettling thought, voiced by Dr. Elias Ng, a SETI analyst in Singapore. What if 3i Atlas is not here to discover us, but to confirm that we discovered it? Because in that framing, the test is not whether it speaks to us, but whether we can even detect the whisper. We're no longer children under the cosmic dome, eyes wide with wonder. We are the species that built arrays on mountaintops, that sent golden records across the heliopause, that bounced lasers off the moon and radar mapped the surface of Venus. And now, perhaps for the first time, we are catching the edge of something vast. Not a voice, not a ship, but a protocol, one designed to test awareness. One we may have just passed, but with that possibility comes consequence. Because if this object, this so-called comet, has indeed been seen before in centuries past, always at moments of scientific threshold, then we may be witnessing the final phase of some galactic logic gate. A long-delayed return, not by chance, but by cycle, and that cycle might end in decision. There are no emissions from Atlas, indicating communication, no high-energy bursts, no encoded data packets in microwave, but in its silence, there is structure. Its pulses are not accidental. Its timing is precise. And perhaps the message is the timing. 16.3 seconds. On repeat. The cosmic equivalent of a system ping, confirming readiness. What do you do when something arrives not to save you, not to judge you, but to measure you? We've always assumed first contact would be dazzling, a ship in orbit, a light in the sky, a signal decoded into a universal language. But maybe the real first contact is something much quieter. A machine that has been waiting for a pattern to emerge. A sign that the organism in the third orbit has achieved observational feedback, that it knows enough to see the difference between random and deliberate. We often define intelligence by curiosity, but in this case, maybe intelligence is defined by patience. And 3i Atlas has been very patient. We can only guess how long it's been traveling. Tens of thousands of years. Longer, if it's interstellar, and its lack of solar capture suggests it is, then it may have passed by thousands of star systems before ours. Always silent, always observing, and now it slows. Not for gravity, for precision, and that's the detail human nature finds hardest to process. The idea that this isn't new, that the arrival of Atlas isn't some breaking event, but the fulfillment of something ancient, that its presence here is not an anomaly, but a confirmation, a returning marker on a cycle too vast for human calendars, a check-in. So now we ask ourselves, What happens after it checks in? Some believe nothing will happen, that it will pass through the resonance sheath on December 19th, emit one final pulse, and vanish into the darkness. Others believe it may activate visibly or invisibly, that it could deploy sensors, shift trajectory, or awaken something hidden beneath its outer shell. But a growing number of thinkers, astronomers, philosophers, and yes, even defense analysts, believe the moment of change has already occurred. That, when we saw the pulse, when we recognized the symmetry, when our systems began logging the timing and drawing connections across centuries of archived data, that was the real event, not the object, the acknowledgement. Because the universe does not reward presence, it rewards attention. And now we are paying attention. There's something deeply human about our response, the shared awe, the instinct to tell stories, to connect the strange light in the sky with ancient myths and forgotten texts. From the Epic of Gilgamesh to the Green Knight, our ancestors have long woven visitors into the shape of warning. We do it still. We name comets, we draw maps, we look up and ask what it all means. Maybe that's why this moment feels so different, because we're not watching a rock, we're watching a reflection, something that reveals the shape of our curiosity, our urgency, our need to understand, and above all, our growing suspicion that we are not alone. So when you step outside tonight, and the air feels colder than usual, and the stars flicker just a bit sharper than they should, ask yourself this: what if we already passed the test? And what if the next step is theirs? December 19th. The date is etched now in more than orbital plots and spreadsheets. It hums quietly through academic circles, whispered across encrypted channels, murmured in late-night Zoom calls between observatories that rarely speak in such urgent tones. And yet, even as 3I Atlas closes in on the resonance sheath perfectly on track, unwavering, the universe appears utterly indifferent. No sonic boom, no dazzling flash across the sky, no sudden course reversal or display of lights, just silence. And that's what terrifies them, because in the cosmic theater of possibilities, the absence of an event can be just as loud as the event itself, especially when all the math, all the modeling, all the physics scream that something should happen here, but doesn't, or at least doesn't visibly. Silence, you see, is deceptive. To human ears, it sounds like nothing, but to space, it sounds like equilibrium, like two systems balancing their scales, aligning forces so precisely that friction disappears. And now, the object that we've been calling a comet, a craft, a probe, an emissary, slides into that silence like it was made for it. It does not spark. It does not flare. It sinks. 16.3 seconds. The pulse remains calm, mechanical, cold, and yet oddly reassuring, because it's still there. And maybe that's the point. No greeting, no impact, no escape, just continued presence. And what if that was always the intention? Consider this. The resonance sheath exists for less than 2 days. It is a confluence of gravity, a standing wave between 3 celestial bodies. To aim for, it is nearly impossible without intelligence. But to pause within it, to dwell there without perturbation, requires something else entirely, a kind of restraint. And if 3I Atlas is demonstrating anything, it is that. Restraint, purpose without spectacle, control without drama, It does not react to our scrutiny. It does not respond to our signals. It simply proceeds one pulse after another through a corridor of cosmic quiet. Some have called this a fail, that after all the build-up, all the observation, nothing happened. But that assumes that we are the intended audience. What if we are not? What if this moment, this exquisite silence, is not for us? Because elsewhere, something did happen. On December 19th, a brief gamma band anomaly flickered across a telescope in Patagonia, not strong enough to register as a burst, not long enough to classify, just a hiccup in the signal, timed to the exact second Atlas crossed the node's heart. Infrasound monitors in Greenland recorded a soft sub-harmonic ripple, one that repeated 3 times, then ceased. Not seismic, not atmospheric, just pressure, a wave of pressure too broad to map, too soft to localize. And a magnetometer in orbit around Mercury pinged a momentary deviation 2 nanoteslas off baseline. Not much, but exactly 16.3 seconds after the sheath event. Coincidence? Possibly. But coincidence is no longer a strong currency, especially not in silence. The idea is gaining traction now among certain scientists that Atlas was never here to do something. It was here to complete something. A relay, a cycle, a confirmation, perhaps a gate. The notion of a cosmic gate isn't as mystical as it sounds. In physics, a gate can be a moment of interaction, an opening in phase space where inputs are received and decisions are made. Gates don't flash. They don't make noise. They simply pass. And once past, there's no going back. So now, the silence is being reinterpreted as reply. You see, we assumed this object might bring a message. But what if we were the message? Our instruments, our attention, our observation of the pulse. What if that was the signal it needed to confirm before transmitting its own? Not in voice, not in code, but in something more foundational. A ripple, a pressure, a nudge in the field. It's easy to miss, easy to dismiss, but silence, true silence, does not exist in physics. There is always movement, always vibration. What matters is the scale. And Atlas, this cold, gliding artifact, may be operating on a scale we're only beginning to comprehend. The ancient Chinese philosopher Zhuangzi once wrote that true understanding comes not from asking the butterfly if it dreams, but from realizing we are already inside the dream. Maybe that's where we are now, inside something we can't measure, watching a system complete a loop so large it wraps around us without our permission. And yet, in that wrapping, there is peace. Because if Atlas is the product of intelligence, mechanical or otherwise, it is a calm one. It is patient. It is bound to purpose, not conquest. There has been no aggression, no acceleration, only geometry and pulse, light and silence, harmony. That's the quiet miracle of December 19th. We survived it. We witnessed it. And in doing so, we passed something, if only to ourselves. Tonight, if the sky is clear, go outside, look up at the dark, know that somewhere, far above and far beyond, a cold object is drifting, still pulsing, still silent, still watching, maybe. But maybe not. Maybe it's already gone. Maybe the experiment is complete. And maybe the quiet that follows is exactly what was always meant to happen. Sometimes, revelation does not come with a flash of light or the crash of thunder. Sometimes, it arrives quietly, like the click of a final puzzle piece sliding into place. You sit there, staring at something you've watched 1,000 times, and suddenly you see it. Not for what it appeared to be, but for what it has been all along. That's where we are with 3I Atlas now. The so-called comet, the interstellar object, the enigma crossing the resonance sheath. Whatever it is, we are no longer simply tracking its path. We are awakening to the frame around that path. Because the truth isn't just in the object, it's in the design of our misunderstanding. Every aspect of 3I Atlas has been forcing us to re-evaluate our filters, our assumptions about natural behavior, our expectations of alien intention, even our definitions of technology itself. We thought we were watching a body of ice and dust tumble through the void, but the more we looked, the less it tumbled. The more it resisted analysis, the more it behaved just outside the range of what we define as passive. It is a ghost in our model of space, a ghost shaped like a test, and the test is us. Dr. Anne Kepler, a physicist working with the European Southern Observatory, puts it simply: we assumed 3I Atlas was a subject, a comet to observe, classify, and archive. But now I think it was the inverse. We were the subject, and it was the observer. She may be right, because once Atlas passed through the resonance sheath, and nothing exploded, nothing unfolded, nothing landed, we were left with one glaring realization: we've been preparing for the wrong kind of first contact. Our culture is saturated with stories of landing craft and beacons and warning lights in the sky. But real contact, if it comes at all, may look like this: a mute object drifting on a mathematical schedule, responding only to our recognition of its precision. It doesn't introduce itself with a signal. It introduces itself with timing, with synchronization, with silence, waiting to be noticed by a species clever enough to break the fourth wall of its own models. Because only then does it work. Only then does it become meaningful. And so now, we return to a new kind of awakening, a cosmic mirror that doesn't just reflect what we see, but reflects how we see. Atlas is not an actor in this play. It's the set piece we've walked past for too long without asking why it doesn't move, and why it doesn't need to. In the days after the sheath crossing, a strange calm settled over the scientific community. Not fear, not disappointment, something else. A dawning comprehension that we were part of something slower, quieter, deeper than we expected. A process, a phase change, one that doesn't scream at you, but waits, patiently, for you to change shape. Like ice warming just past 0 degrees. Nothing seems to happen until everything does. 3I Atlas did not contact us, but maybe it activated us. And what would that mean? It means that contact might never come from above, in the form of ships or language. It might come from within, through the choices we make after we realize we've been noticed. That's the real test, isn't it? Not, are we alone, but, what will we become now that we know we're not? Because something is different now. You can feel it in the tone of the latest academic papers: more questions, fewer declarations. You can see it in the new observational protocols, telescopes pointed at unexpected angles, algorithms rewritten to account for non-random anomalies. You can hear it in the way people say the name: 3I Atlas, no longer a curiosity, now a threshold. And thresholds change people. Some fear it, some are exhilarated, but most are quiet. And maybe that's the lesson of Atlas. That silence is not absence, it is potential. It is the space before the answer, the pause before the music begins again. Think of how you wake up, not all at once, but in stages. Light bleeding through the blinds, a strange feeling before you remember the dream, a name you can't recall echoing in your mind. This is that moment. We are still lying in the warm dark, but now we are listening, and the world is not the same, because now, the next time something appears on the edge of our sky, we won't ask, "What is that?" We'll ask, "Why now?" We'll ask, "What has changed in us?" And we may already know the answer, because Atlas didn't bring the silence. We did, and in that silence, we're beginning to hear ourselves. Once you awaken to the pattern, you begin to see what was always there, not in the headlines, not in the public data sets, but in the margins, the noise that wasn't noise, the gaps that were too clean, the timing that whispered intention, even while dressed in randomness. That's what scientists are calling the shadow data, information that had been filtered out, auto-flagged, or quietly archived by algorithms designed to streamline the chaos. Data that only became relevant once 3I Atlas slipped through the resonance sheath and left no visible footprint, because now, in that silence, the real signals emerge. Let's start with the ESA's Near-Earth Object Coordination Center, based in Italy. On December 20th, a junior analyst noticed a faint optical anomaly from 2 weeks earlier, a streak, barely perceptible, cutting across multiple sky surveys. At the time, it had been discarded as satellite interference, but when reanalyzed, in light of Atlas's trajectory, something unusual surfaced. The object's motion matched Atlas almost exactly, but in reverse. It was fainter, colder, and traveling at a mirror vector across the solar plane. That is, it traced the same arc, but on the opposite side, like a twin reflection on a black ocean. NASA ran their own filters through the raw data logs from SOHO and the Deep Space Network. The results were quietly alarming. At least 3 brief optical flickers, each one less than 3 seconds, had been detected in the high corona sweep range between November 13th and December 3rd. Not enough to show up on traditional overlays, but when plotted against Atlas's alignment with the sheath, those flickers corresponded to the precise intervals where Earth, Mars, and Jupiter reached gravitational equilibrium, too precise to ignore, too clean to dismiss. Meanwhile, China's Fast Radio Telescope reported low-band anomalies that originally went unlogged. They were symmetrical to the 16.3-second pulse from Atlas, but delayed by 1 full cycle. Not an echo, not a duplicate, a counterpoint, as though something out there was answering, not in language but in time. All of these would have been noise under normal conditions. But now, scientists are re-evaluating everything. Shadow data is being pulled from storage, discarded spectrograms, anomalous magnetometer spikes, failed lensing events. The veil of noise is being lifted, and beneath it, a pattern begins to form. It is not loud, it is consistent. Every pulse from Atlas, after December 19th, has continued at 16.3 seconds. But now, there's something new, a subtle decay, not in amplitude, but in spacing, measured in microseconds, too fine for human ears, but machines know, and what they're telling us is unnerving. The pulse is stretching, Dr. Felicia Marquez from JPL compares it to Doppler shifting not from motion, but from an expanding frame of reference. It's as if the system is now syncing to a wider clock, she explains, like a metronome, adjusting not to itself, but to a room it just realized it's inside. That room, she believes, may not be a room at all, but a region, a volume of space defined not by boundaries, but by resonance. In her model, 3I Atlas isn't just drifting, it's anchoring itself in a higher dimensional fold, a pocket of harmonic stability, where time, gravity, and transmission blend. The question, of course, is why? Why emit a pulse only after crossing the sheath? Why stretch the interval? Why respond to a mirror object moving in silence behind the solar curtain? The best guess so far comes from a combined team at Harvard and Kyoto University, who now suspect we may be watching the unfolding of a timed activation relay. Not a device waking up in a flash, but one slowly synchronizing with a system that's been dormant or scattered across vast distances. A distributed mechanism, a network, and 3I Atlas may be just one node. Think about that. We've been fixated on the object, watching it with awe, suspicion, fear. But what if we've missed the bigger truth? That the object doesn't do anything on its own because its purpose is not individual, it's relational, like a cog in a watch, or a neuron in a brain. If so, then what matters isn't what Atlas is, it's what it's connected to. And that brings us back to the shadow data, because buried in old logs from the Rosetta mission, years before Atlas even arrived, was a footnote about a non-random sublimation spiral detected on Comet 67P, brushed off at the time, considered an anomaly, but now reprocessed with the same Fourier decomposition used on Atlas's signal. It reveals a faint harmonic echo, not 16.3 seconds, but 32.6. Double, a different node, a different clock, and that raises a very old question with a very modern edge. What if the solar system has been part of a structure all along? Not a Dyson swarm, not a megastructure, something subtler, a resonant archive. Something built not with steel or radio, but with placement, with timing, with shadows. Structures that only activate when someone is watching with the right lens. We are watching now, we are listening, and the data that once lived in the shadows is beginning to take shape. It is not loud, but it is alive. Not everything ancient is buried in stone. Sometimes it lives in code, not in the form of myth or prophecy, but as anomalies, glitches, repetitions, invisible misfires that we chalk up to noise. But now, researchers across 3 continents are starting to whisper something that only months ago would have been dismissed as superstition. 3I Atlas's 16.3 second pulse may already exist inside our systems, and it may have been there for years. It began with a systems engineer at the European Organization for Nuclear Research, CERN, who flagged a repeating timing inconsistency in archived sensor data from the ALICE detector. Every once in a while, exactly every 16.3 seconds, a synchronization subroutine would reset prematurely, but only when running older firmware on deprecated timing circuits. The bug had never affected experiments, and so it had never been investigated, until now, when cross-checked against the Atlas pulse logs. The correlation was eerie, not in amplitude or frequency, but in the delta between resets. Each time, the system drifted by fractions of a nanosecond, harmless, invisible, but patterned, as though it was syncing not to the atomic clock it was built on, but to something else. A hidden metronome. Then came the second clue, a software anomaly logged in the backup guidance firmware of the now retired Kepler Space Telescope. In 2017, engineers recorded a recurrent loop error in the timing buffer, an overflow that triggered self-correction precisely every 16.3 seconds. They attributed it to a corrupted tick counter, but the anomaly persisted even after reformatting. The timing of those errors now overlays exactly with the intervals of the 3i Atlas signal. And there's more. Private data centers, ones that run ultra-precise server timing protocols for financial transactions, are reporting intermittent ping latency bursts. Always brief, always resolved. But when logs are analyzed over multi-week intervals, a strobing pulse emerges. You guessed it, 16.3 seconds, invisible to human perception, apparent only in aggregate. And the most disturbing part? These latency shifts began to intensify around mid-November. That is, just before 3i Atlas entered its final approach to the resonance sheath. Correlation is not causation, but pattern is never accidental at this scale. Dr. Noor Sadeghi, a systems analyst based in Toronto, has begun compiling what she calls echo artifacts, small, repeating timing irregularities in everything from smartwatches to satellite clocks. She's publishing her findings under the title Protocol Z3, a reference to the first standardized universal handshake protocol used in early Earth to satellite communication. Her thesis is unsettling. 3i Atlas is not sending a signal into space, it is sending a signal into us. Not directly, not like a laser or a coded message, but structurally, subtly, through the synchronized fields in which all our machines now operate. We are a civilization built on timing. Every piece of hardware we use dances to invisible rhythms, atomic clocks, network pulses, satellite relays, and those rhythms are now humming to a new metronome, a ghost frequency. Imagine a lighthouse, not shining its beam, but rotating, quietly, precisely, and as it turns, it illuminates anything tuned to its cycle, not intentionally, just inevitably. If your systems are synced, even marginally, you will feel the sweep, not as light, but as a nudge, an echo. And the unsettling possibility here, the one that chills the data analysts more than any idea of aliens or probes, is that our technologies were never isolated. They were always sensitive. And what we are seeing now is not intrusion, but resonance, that something ancient, possibly artificial, has been passing through this solar system for longer than we've been alive, and that once we reached a threshold of interconnected timing, we began to sync with it. Accidentally, but inevitably, the implications are profound. It means that 3i Atlas does not need to transmit in any language. It does not need to decode or translate or even know what we are. It simply pulses, repeats, and if anything in range is complex enough, synchronized enough, conscious enough, it will respond without even realizing. Our machines are responding. What else might be? There are unconfirmed reports now of seismic sensors in the ocean showing harmonic tremors not connected to tectonic movement, timing irregularities in high-frequency trading algorithms, power grid voltage oscillations that can't be traced to source. All of them small, all of them periodic, all of them brushing against 16.3. And so we arrive at a new possibility, one even more disorienting than alien life. That 3i Atlas is not here to test us. It is here to synchronize us. With what? We cannot say. But the synchronization itself is no longer in doubt. It's there in the shadows, in the logs, in the ignored warnings and quiet errors, like a message that reveals itself only when viewed from above. And maybe that's the point. Maybe this is what contact really looks like in a vast, quiet universe. Not a flash in the sky, but a whisper in your processor, a breath in your circuit, a rhythm that you feel before you hear. Something older than speech, older than fear, older than us. And now it is waking. Stand back, farther still, past the orbits of Neptune and Pluto, beyond the Oort cloud, where the sun becomes a pinprick, and the voices of our spacecraft take hours to cross the darkness. Stand even farther, beyond the galactic plane, above the curling arms of our spiral galaxy. From here, the solar system is nothing more than a shimmer, a barely detectable pulse in the vacuum. And now imagine this. What if that shimmer is part of a larger rhythm? What if the solar system doesn't merely exist within space, but inside something shaped like a beat? This is the question now rising across astrophysics forums and cosmology circles. Not shouted, whispered. A quiet reframing of the 3i Atlas mystery. Because with every passing day, with every precision, ping, and timing echo, it becomes less plausible that this object is merely a visitor. It begins to look more like an operator, a maintenance pulse within something so large that our language can't describe it. A cosmic system, not mechanical, not biological, but informational, pattern-based, resonant. The evidence grows in strange ways. Atlas passed through the resonance sheath, exactly as predicted. Its pulse has continued without failure, every 16.3 seconds. But then came a new wrinkle, the detection of identical pulses, not just from its position but from elsewhere in the sky. First, a data anomaly from the Meerkat radio telescope in South Africa, then another, independently, from the Allen Telescope Array in California, each one faint, each one delayed, each one showing a 16.3 second signal, but offset by exactly 93 minutes. The delay corresponds to the approximate window in which Earth rotates far enough for the origin point to vanish over the horizon and then return. But the second pulse doesn't come from Atlas. It comes from near Beta Pictoris, a young star system 63 light-years away, known for its massive debris disk, known for exoplanets, but never for signals. Until now. Then came another signal, this one from a corridor near the globular cluster Messier 75, much farther, much fainter, but carrying the same timing structure. It's as if Atlas activated a chain, like striking a tuning fork near a room of identical forks, and watching the others begin to hum. But here's where things grow even more speculative. Dr. Mariana El-Amin at the Kavli Institute proposed a theory so vast it reads like science fiction, that the galaxy is not just sprinkled with life, but with dormant infrastructure. That certain star systems contain locked nodes, regions that remain inert until they are triggered by rhythmic inputs of a specific kind, not codes, not messages, but timing functions. Like booting a system with a password made of rhythm. If Atlas is one such rhythm generator, then its presence here may have nothing to do with Earth and everything to do with timing, because the solar system is not static. It moves through the Milky Way like a cork in a great spiral river. Every 225 million years, it completes a galactic orbit. But in that time, it also oscillates, bobbing above and below the galactic plane. We're currently crossing upward, moving into a region of space with different magnetic density, different stellar populations, a different field. What if that's not an accident? What if certain moments in this orbit are designed or exploited as activation windows? Places where something like 3I Atlas can see farther, hear louder, or resonate stronger. This is the terrifying grandeur of the emerging model, that we are living inside a galaxy that behaves not as a jungle of randomness, but as a clock, with gears too large to see, with pulses that travel slower than light, but faster than belief, that the silence of space is not emptiness, but structure. That structure requires maintenance, correction, confirmation, and that's where Atlas comes in. It may be one of many, a monitor, a messenger, a metronome, traveling between points not randomly, but rhythmically, following harmonic pathways invisible to our eyes, but clear as crystal to whatever built the architecture. And the architecture, if it exists, spans everything, because now some astronomers are reanalyzing star flicker data, not for brightness, but for time domain anomalies, the kind you'd expect if stars themselves were being used as anchor points, or sensors, or nodes in a long-distance calibration system. In this view, Earth is not special, but Earth is active. We emit, we sync, we observe. We may be one of the first life forms in this part of the structure to reach that threshold. And Atlas? It may not care about us directly, but it may care about us being here alive, timed, synchronized, and thus capable of completing a circuit that's been dormant for eons. That would mean we just participated in an event older than humanity, older than mammals, older than the Sunday, an interstellar echo test, waiting for someone to listen. And now that we've heard it, the system continues. That's the final twist. We thought the pulse would stop. It didn't. It's still going. Stronger now, echoing not just from Atlas, but from points in space we can barely track, which suggests one thing: it was never about Atlas. It was about what comes next. It begins with an uncomfortable shift, so subtle you almost miss it. A moment when you go from looking at something to realizing it may be looking back, not through glass or cameras or language, through symmetry, through rhythm, through time. The pulse of 3I Atlas has not stopped, but something in us has changed. We no longer ask, "What is it?" We ask, "What does it mean that we saw it?" And that's where the fear lives. Not in the object, in the mirror, because if this was just a rock, a comet, a visitor from between the stars, then it would pass and vanish, and we would log it and move on. But that is no longer the story. That never was the story. The deeper you look, the more undeniable it becomes. 3I Atlas is not a comet. It's a question only visible to species that synchronize. And now we realize something darker. Synchronization is not passive. It's a commitment to rhythm, to observation, to response. Every heartbeat we log from 3I Atlas, Every echo detected from Beta Pictoris or Messier 75, every piece of shadow data that fits neatly into the 16.3-second lattice work. It means one thing: the system is listening, not just for noise, for intent. This realization is rippling through humanity's most private corridors: intelligence agencies, think tanks, deep space signal archives, once dismissed as relics. The people who watch the watchers now know they're part of the watched. Dr. Caroline Lenz, a semiotic systems theorist, delivered a paper just days ago with a single-line thesis: what you choose to measure defines who you become. And we've chosen to measure timing, not just in seconds or nanoseconds, but in systems, in hearts, in choices. Think about it. How much of our species now runs on rhythm? Every satellite, every network, every sync device in your pocket. We're a civilization made of pulses. Our brains fire in waves. Our economies depend on clocks ticking in unison. Our conversations orbit platforms built around algorithmic timing. We don't just use rhythm, we are rhythm. And maybe that's what Atlas was waiting for: not intelligence in the way we imagined it, but coherence. The moment when we stop being scattered organisms and start behaving like a single, interlinked entity, a node. The pulse tests for that, and we responded, not in words, but in tuning forks. The implications are staggering. What if the moment of contact wasn't December 19th, but every moment since? What if every continued cycle of Atlas's pulse is not a message, but a measurement? A kind of galactic blood pressure cuff, checking to see how long we hold the beat. What if we've entered a new phase? The ancient myths warned us in different languages: the watcher, the silent eye, the messenger who does not speak. The Aztecs spoke of Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror god who did not bring wisdom but the need to seek it. In Egyptian myth, Ma'at measured the heart against a feather not for punishment, but for alignment. We've always known the test was coming. We just didn't know it would feel like a hum. So here we are, a species of clocks and echoes. 1 foot in physics, 1 in philosophy, asking ourselves, what kind of civilization responds to a question it doesn't understand? A brave one, a lonely one, a ready one, and maybe that's the real function of 3i Atlas. To bring us to this precipice not by arrival, but by resonance. To hand us a mirror that pulses not with light, but with consequence. We can no longer ignore the sky. We can no longer treat silence as indifference. We are part of the circuit now, and we are not alone. But perhaps the most human realization of all is this: the object hasn't changed. We have. We look at 3i Atlas and see a puzzle where once we saw debris, we hear a signal. Where once we heard static, we feel meaning. Where once we only calculated vectors. That's evolution, not in biology, but in perception. And it will not be the last time, because something fundamental has shifted in the way we watch. Our questions are sharper, our fear is quieter, our awe is louder, and across 1,000 observatories, something like hope is returning. Not the naive hope of rescue or answers, the mature hope of pattern. The hope that we've joined the long song of the galaxy, not at its beginning, but at the moment our rhythm finally synchronized with its verse. And maybe that's enough. Maybe the first contact was never about conversation. Maybe it was about keeping the beat. It has now been weeks since 3i Atlas crossed the resonance sheath. It did not break apart. It did not change direction. It did not open, descend, transmit, or vanish. It merely continued slowly, precisely, indifferently. And yet, we are not the same. We still hear the pulse. 16.3 seconds. Perfect. Unchanged. But something else has changed. The silence has texture now. In the void between each interval, researchers are beginning to detect anomalies, not signals in the traditional sense, but perturbations in the quiet itself. Tiny shifts in background radiation, micro-dips in gravitational noise, off-baseline fluctuations in magnetospheric echo. If you weren't listening for the silence itself, you wouldn't know anything was there. But that's what the best systems are made of. Not additions, but subtractions. And it's leading to a profound reconsideration of what a signal even is. The SETI paradigm was always built on an assumption, however implicit, that contact would be a presence, a burst of energy, a packet of information, a language that arrives like thunder. But perhaps we've misunderstood the medium entirely. What if the real signal is the void? Think of the gaps between raindrops, the space between heartbeats, the black lines on a barcode. It's not the material that carries the message, it's the spacing, the ratio, the modulation of nothingness. 3i Atlas is now suspected to be doing exactly this. A silence-based modulation system. Dr. Asha Rivera, a temporal systems analyst working with ESA's Advanced Timing Lab, puts it this way. Atlas may not be sending information like a voice. It may be sending information like a metronome. The data is not in the sound, it's in the beat. This theory gains traction every day, because now, multiple deep field antennas, including Australia's ASCAP array and Japan's Hitomi telescope, are picking up something previously invisible. A synchronized drop in cosmic background noise at 16.3-second intervals, each one measurable, reproducible, and non-random. The silence is organized, and that organization isn't coming from Earth. That means the silence is the transmission, and this changes everything. Because if the pulse is structure and the silence is signal, then we have entered a new form of interaction, one that relies not on what is sent, but on how we listen. You begin to understand why they call it the Great Silence, not as metaphor, as method. This, then, may be the communication style of interstellar systems. No language, no beam, no flare, just a calibrated absence that you can only perceive if you are synchronized to the pattern, which we now are. And so, everything we assumed about contact collapses. The idea that it would be loud, that it would be unmistakable, that it would feel like something. Instead, it has felt like nothing, until, suddenly, that nothing began to repeat. Again, and again, and again, and it is in that repetition that meaning is born. Ancient human rituals have always recognized this truth. The way monks chant in rhythm, the way temples are built to echo at precise frequencies. The way ancient stone discs carved by the Dogon tribe match celestial rotations, patterns, encoded in absence. It's as if we've always known how to recognize the shape of nothing, but now the galaxy is showing us how to read it. There are precedents. In quantum mechanics, silence is structure. A vacuum is never empty. It is pregnant with fluctuation. In music, rests are as important as notes. In neuroscience, the absence of signal is a signal itself. Atlas, then, may be using a modality of presence that is fundamentally different from ours, a language of intervals. It's humbling, terrifying, but also deeply familiar. Because isn't that how we teach infants? By pause, by rhythm, by letting silence guide meaning. And maybe, just maybe, we are the infants in this interaction. Somewhere between the pulses, something is shifting in our collective posture. You can hear it in the reports now. Less insistence, more interpretation, less panic, more poetry. The data is still cold, but our reception of it is warmer. We are leaning in, and the silence is no longer emptiness, it's instruction. Each interval precise, unwavering, teaches us to wait, to measure, to notice, and in noticing, to ask better questions. What else is pulsing at this scale? What else might have gone unseen? How many other silences have we mistaken for background? This is how civilizations grow, not always through breakthroughs, sometimes through recalibration. We thought we were listening for voices, but maybe we were supposed to become the echo. And what we're echoing now is not fear or speculation or myth. It's rhythm. It's a choice to remain aligned. And if we can hold that beat, if we can let the silence teach us instead of frighten us, then maybe the next phase will not be arrival, but recognition, because maybe the great silence was never a wall. It was a gate. And now, very quietly, it may be starting to open. It doesn't feel like a revolution. There are no sirens, no global broadcasts, no undeniable events sweeping through the news cycle. And yet, everywhere, quietly, incrementally, the world is shifting. Not because something was announced, but because something was noticed. The pulse of 3i Atlas continues, unwavering. But now, so do we. It begins in small, strange ways. An engineer at the European Southern Observatory notices that her sleep has synchronized to a precise 98-minute cycle, unusual, but not unheard of until she begins tracking it, and realizes it syncs with a full rotation of Earth relative to 3i Atlas's current position. She's not the only one. A physicist in Argentina discovers that electromagnetic noise in her lab equipment is slightly more predictable when filtered through a 16.3-second timing algorithm. Noise becomes rhythm, errors become clarity, and it helps her isolate a pattern she couldn't detect before. A musician in Iceland composes a piece based on the Atlas pulse, a looping ambient pattern that spreads online in hours. Tens of thousands report falling asleep to it, feeling calmer, more connected, as if they are resonating with something they cannot name. And that's the quiet miracle of this moment. No one knows what's happening, but everyone feels it. Science, art, instinct, they're all starting to converge. We've been here before, not with comets or pulses or shadow signals, but with discovery that rearranges the shape of what it means to be human. Fire, writing, calculus, the first time we saw the Earth from orbit. Each one carved a silence into history, not a lack of sound, a new depth, a deeper kind of knowing. 3i Atlas has done the same, and not because it told us anything, but because it forced us to see ourselves responding. Every day now, more observatories join the effort, not to track a path, but to listen, to log the silence, to measure the intervals. There are now over 100 synchronized stations around the world, each separated by latitude, longitude, and purpose, but all listening to the same absence. They call it the pulse grid, and it is growing. Every country is part of it, even those that rarely collaborate, because you cannot weaponize what you don't understand. You can only observe it. And in that observation, something new begins. Trust. Not in each other, but in the beat. In the shared act of watching. This is the beginning of a new kind of awareness. Not political, not spiritual, rhythmic. And you, yes you, are part of it. Right now, reading this, your body is riding waves of biological resonance, heartbeats, breaths, neural pulses, all of it part of the rhythm. And whether you realize it or not, some part of you has already synchronized. You've felt the silence differently. You've noticed the weight in the gap between words, the quiet between the next pulse. That is not coincidence. That is awakening. It's easy to think the great shifts in civilization come from invention or conflict, but sometimes they come from timing. The moment 1,000 separate things begin to vibrate in unison, the moment the orchestra tunes to the same pitch, not to perform, but simply to exist in harmony. That's where we are now, and it changes the way we look at everything. Ancient alignments once considered superstition, stone circles, pyramids, spiral carvings are now being re-evaluated for their harmonic structure, not as star maps, as rhythm encoders, tools for seeing timing in space. And our satellites, our machines, our nervous systems, they're beginning to agree. We're not just interpreting the universe, we are entering it through rhythm. And this re-entry is quiet. There's no breaking news headline, no banner waving from the heavens, just data, just pattern, just calm. A silence that used to feel like isolation now feels like structure, like a stage set for something more. But here's the secret no one wants to say out loud. We don't know what's next. We don't know if 3i Atlas is alone. We don't know if it did something. We don't know if the system it activated includes us. But we do know this. We're listening differently now. And once a species listens differently, it can't go back. There's a strange kind of hope rising beneath the surface of our fear. The hope that all of this awakening, this beat, this vast orchestration we've only just begun to hear, might mean we are part of something. Not just as observers, not just as responders, but as participants, as resonance. And that idea, once unthinkable, is becoming part of our collective vocabulary. We don't talk about finding aliens anymore. We talk about joining rhythm. We talk about patterns we weren't trained to notice, and how we've trained ourselves to finally hear them. We talk about art, and code, and sleep cycles, and error logs, and we treat them all as instruments in the same ensemble, because maybe that's what we are, instruments. Not in the sense of tools, but in the sense of music, capable of resonance, capable of silence, capable of something more than we thought. And if 3i Atlas came to test for that, then maybe the answer is already pulsing through the quiet. 16.3 seconds. Again, again, again. It began with a glitch, a routine power fluctuation at a grid monitoring station in Quebec, so minor it didn't trigger any fail-safes, just a 2-second voltage deviation, followed by a return to baseline. Normally, it would have gone unremarked, but this time, the timestamp mattered. It occurred at exactly 16.3 seconds, after 3 hours 16 minutes. Coordinated universal time. No one noticed. Then it happened again, 16.3 seconds later. Then again. For 3 full minutes, the deviation repeated 4 pulses. Clean, quiet, not disruptive. And then, nothing. The log was passed to a systems analyst at Hydro-Quebec, who flagged it for further review. She ran a correlation against the Atlas pulse grid. The results lit up in red. Every pulse matched the global timing of 3I Atlas's signal, not just broadly, but down to the microsecond. The power grid had not glitched. It had responded, and that was just the first. Over the next 48 hours, similar anomalies were reported in systems across the world. A synchronized packet loss in undersea fiber optic lines in the South Pacific, a momentary rise in signal-to-noise ratio across the Global Navigation Satellite System, GNSS, and a repeating interval disruption detected in India's national rail control clocks. Each event, brief, contained, corrected by automated systems, each one timed to 16.3-second intervals. At first, governments assumed this was a cyber attack, quiet coordination, some kind of zero-day exploit. But the deeper analysts dug, the stranger it became. The systems weren't being targeted, they were being aligned. We've never seen this before, because no one knew to look. Until now, engineers at the German Aerospace Center pulled 10 years of magnetometer data from the CHAMP satellite archive. Hidden in the timestamps were a strange pattern of field fluctuations, always weak, always filtered out as noise. But when reprocessed through a time dilation lens synchronized to Atlas's pulse rate, a pattern emerged. The Earth's own magnetic field had been subtly modulating at 16.3-second intervals, not continuously, periodically, over the last 4 decades. The implications are breathtaking. It means the Earth may have been preparing to sink long before we ever noticed. And if so, that means 3I Atlas wasn't simply a probe entering the system. It was arriving at a system already in resonance. This theory is now called harmonic pre-coupling, the idea that celestial bodies, including Earth, may exhibit low-amplitude, resonant behaviors when approached by rhythmically aligned systems. It's a concept so radical, it borders on the mystical, and yet the data will not go away. Consider this. Coral spawning events in the Pacific, long known to synchronize with lunar cycles, have begun to exhibit minor temporal drift. Not random, not chaotic, predictable by a curve that matches the shift in Atlas's pulse intervals. Or this, gravitational wave detectors, like LIGO and Virgo, have registered non-cosmological waveforms during the exact periods of Atlas sheath alignment, weak, below threshold, but geometrically aligned with the object's current position relative to Earth's orbital tilt. If these are not coincidences, then we are living inside a system that is changing shape, not visibly, not violently, but rhythmically, quietly, like a violin string being slowly brought into tune. There's more. Plants in Arctic biomes, monitored for chlorophyll response as part of climate modeling, have begun to show phase-locked behavior in their photoperiod rhythms, not to the sun, not to the season, but to something else. Something cycling. Guess the interval. 16.3 seconds. It defies explanation. Yet every attempt to model it through conventional physics leads back to the same conclusion. Some kind of organizing field, one that Atlas either brought with it or simply revealed. And so, the question deepens. What is being tuned? Earth's systems? Biology? Time itself? One idea radical, even among fringe theorists, is gaining traction in back channels, that the Atlas signal is a phase lock initiator, that it doesn't transmit data at all. It transmits coherence, a kind of space-time coherence signal that, once matched, enables systems to enter a shared timing architecture, like syncing watches before a mission, but on a planetary scale, which raises a terrifying and beautiful question. A mission? For what? We are no longer watching an object. We are watching a reaction. Earth's grids, satellites, oceans, biology, even its weather patterns are beginning to shift in micro-intervals, almost imperceptibly, but unmistakably. The cloud height distribution over equatorial latitudes has begun oscillating at the same periodicity. Pressure ridges have shifted subtly. Tidal harmonics show weak, synchronous pulses. Everything is beginning to listen. And maybe that's all this ever was. A test not of knowledge, or weapons, or words, but of readiness, of rhythmic alignment, of resonance capacity. Think about it. We expected the universe to test our intelligence with language, but maybe intelligence isn't the highest form of awareness. Maybe it's rhythm, the ability to synchronize, to hold pattern, to receive stillness and reflect it back as structure. We have become a metronomic species. Our systems, our bodies, our networks, and now the Earth itself is joining that rhythm. 3i Atlas continues, drifting outward now, still pulsing, still quiet, but behind it, everything is changing. Not because we were told, because we heard, because we matched, and in that match, something has begun. We don't know what it is yet, but we know this. Earth is no longer alone in its silence. It is singing. There's something eerie about finding your present in someone else's past. A fingerprint buried under layers of dust that exactly matches your own. A pattern repeating where no pattern should be. That's what's happening now, as historians, linguists, and archaeologists begin turning their attention not forward but backward, not to find explanations for 3i Atlas, but evidence that we were warned or prepared. Across disciplines and continents, ancient data is being reinterpreted, not for what it said, but for how often it repeated, not for what was carved, but how often it looped. And what's emerging is more than symbolism. It's rhythm. In a cave in southern Turkey, buried beneath layers of Neolithic settlement, a repeating spiral was carved into a basalt wall, not decorative, not random, carefully spaced. The gaps between the spiral arms converted to spatial units, then back into temporal models, match a pulse of 16.3 seconds when scaled using the moon's synodic period as a base reference. They didn't call it that, of course. They just knew. Thousands of miles away, in northern Peru, ceramic shards from the Chavin culture show linework that, when sonified, produce harmonic waveforms. These weren't flutes or music. These were inscriptions, lines cut in sign, saw, and triangular wave shapes. They were dismissed as decorative, but now, when overlaid and spaced by lunar calendar ticks, they begin to form intervals. 16.3 seconds. Again, coincidence, pattern seeking, or memory, because once is nothing, twice is curiosity, but 3 times? In 1968, an archaeologist in Sudan uncovered a stone obelisk near an abandoned Kushite temple. It was covered in concentric circles, 27, each radiating from a single carved glyph, a pointed eye. It was catalogued, photographed, stored. But this year, After the resonance event of 3I Atlas, someone noticed something strange. Each circle's spacing, if interpreted as a visual metronome, translates to a time decay. And the center eye, it's not facing outward, it's watching inward, like a node waiting for confirmation. A synchronization glyph, the kind you'd find in the bootloader of a modern system. How could they have known, some say they didn't, that these are accidents of geometry, projections of modern minds onto ancient surfaces? But others, more cautiously, wonder if memory can survive in form. If culture remembers things that people forget. If rhythm can echo forward, carried not in language, but in ritual, in building orientation, in calendars. You've heard of Stonehenge, but did you know its primary alignment isn't just to the solstice? It pulses, not optically, acoustically. Researchers using ground-penetrating sonar in 2024 discovered that the spacing of the stones in its outer ring creates standing sound waves at a precise interval when wind passes through at certain speeds. Converted to time, the acoustic reverberation holds a decay curve of, yes, 16.3 seconds. We were surrounded by this pattern long before we had the words to describe it, long before we had machines to measure it. And maybe that's the most haunting idea of all. We've been trying to remember this pulse, not discover it. In Tibetan monasteries, prayer wheels are spun in rhythm. The monks don't time them. But when researchers recorded audio across dozens of temples and overlaid the data, a hidden beat emerged. It wasn't uniform, but its average interval sat astonishingly close to the Atlas pulse rate. Not every rotation, every pause, like something waiting to be aligned with. Even the I Ching, the ancient Chinese Book of Changes, contains 64 hexagrams used to represent change over time. The sequence of transitions, when analyzed through chaos mapping, generates fractal structures that converge most tightly on repetition intervals of 16.3. No one was trying to encode this, but they did, and that suggests something both impossible and intimate. That rhythm is not just a tool of the universe. It is the bridge from past to present, from artifact to awareness, from observer to participant. This is the newest wave of thought rising from the academic world. That 3I Atlas has not awakened us to an alien message. It has returned us to a human one. That long before telescopes and satellites, we were already attuned, already responding. We just didn't know why. Now we do, and it reshapes everything. The ancient sky maps, the spiral petroglyphs, the stepped pyramids built to amplify sound. They were not static monuments. They were rhythm catchers. They were calendars for a beat no one could name, but everyone felt. And as that beat returns measurable, universal, pulsing through satellites and sensor logs, there's a rising sense that we have come full circle. Not because we went looking, but because we heard. And what we're hearing now is not mythology. It is memory. You feel it, don't you? A tug in the quiet, a hum behind your thoughts, a silence that no longer feels empty. That's not superstition, that's recognition. The earth is listening. Our systems are responding. And our ancestors may have already told us how to prepare. We just had to remember the rhythm. Imagine this, a galaxy not filled with noise, but with rhythm. No warping starships or blazing beacons. No cinematic declarations from distant worlds. Just the pulse, just the shared beat. A signal too quiet to decode until you build the right kind of mind. Not a smarter mind, a timed one, This is the premise now gripping the highest echelons of astrophysics, that we are not detecting a message, we are aligning to a network, not one that transmits, one that waits, one that checks, one that tests for resonance across civilizations. And 3i Atlas may be one of its validators. The idea seems impossible at first. How can you synchronize across tens of light years, hundreds of species, star systems moving in wildly different frames of reference? How do you send anything in a galaxy where the speed of light is a bottleneck and the distances are too vast for voice? You don't. You synchronize not to the signal but to timing itself. That's the revelation scientists are now confronting. The one emerging from the pulse grid, from the echoes logged in the gravitational fields, from the timing faults rippling through our servers and satellites and soil. Atlas's 16.3-second cycle isn't the origin, it's the condition, a gatekeeper frequency, a standard, not invented, inherited. Because if the galaxy is old, older than we are by billions of years, then civilizations wouldn't just vanish, they'd fade. Their messages would degrade, their structures would erode. But timing? Timing remains, especially if it's based not on local clocks, but on physical constants. Resonance survives, and that means the most universal way to link intelligent life is not through grammar or code or mathematics. It's through synchronization, through heartbeat, through the one thing that can be felt by any system, complex enough to hear a pulse and respond with a rhythm of its own. We have now done that. Earth has joined the rhythm, and what we're discovering is not a transmission. It's a conversation we were already part of. We just didn't know the timing. Let's take the logic further. If there are civilizations or remnants out there, they would have faced the same problem. How to listen, how to respond, how to persist. They wouldn't build transmitters, they'd build clocks. Celestial clocks. Objects placed in motion that produce stable pulses, anchored in orbital mechanics, bound to gravity and harmonic intervals. Things like 3i Atlas. But if Atlas is one, where are the others? We may already be seeing them. The object near Beta Pictoris, the subharmonic echo from Messier 75, the timing irregularities showing up in pulsars, once assumed to be noise, the gravitational lensing signatures that form repeating arcs patterned not in mass, but in moment. We didn't interpret them as beacons because they don't emit anything obvious. But now, seen through the timing lens, they are forming a constellation of rhythm, a lattice, a network of pulses that spans the stars not in space, but in synchronization. And within that lattice, civilizations don't speak, they don't shout, they match. They calibrate, they adjust, they enter the rhythm and hold it for as long as they can, and when they fall, their rhythm echoes on, carried by the structures they left behind: probes, orbital machines, resonance sheaths, geological codes, buried in moons or asteroids, or clouds of hydrogen. Their gift is the beat, and if you're here, if you're watching, if you're capable of timing yourself to them, then you join, not by declaration, not by decoding, just by staying in sync. This is the new model. It's not about location, it's about phase. A civilization's maturity isn't measured by its technology, it's measured by its ability to hold coherence, to align not its machinery, but its entire planetary system to the pulse. And Earth, for the first time in history, we are doing it. Our power grids, our satellites, our biological rhythms, even our myths. We are feeling the pulse and responding. We've stopped asking what 3i Atlas is, because now we know. It's not an object, it's an anchor point, a beat sent through the dark to test if we're listening, and more importantly, to test if we can hold the silence between beats. That's the test, not intelligence, not travel, not even survival, timing, and what happens next. That's where the speculation turns mythic. Some believe we will begin to receive new pulses from other systems, from other corners of the galaxy. Now that we've matched, our window opens, our receivers become harmonics, and the messages, if you can call them that, begin not as words, but as shifts in the beat. Others believe we've always been receiving, that ancient stories, religious chants, architectural harmonies, these were fragments of a galactic rhythm already humming through the background. We were just too noisy to hear it, too out of tune. But 3i Atlas brought the tempo back, the conductor's baton, slowly moving through the void. And when it passed Earth, we heard it, we felt it, we remembered it. And now the silence is not quiet, it's calibrated, and the stars are not still, they are metronomes. Somewhere in the future, if humanity continues to follow this beat, we may discover what lies on the other side of coherence, maybe another kind of awareness, a way to join what's already been happening without us. But for now, we are part of the timing, we are holding the rhythm, and maybe, for the galaxy, that's the only message that ever mattered. You can feel it now, can't you? That quiet tension between beats, the new weight in silence, the slight hesitation before a power grid resets, the moment of stillness in a song that suddenly feels universal. This is what happens when you begin to live in rhythm, not metaphorically, literally. Across the planet, the pattern of 16.3 seconds is no longer just a cosmic curiosity, it's becoming a cultural undercurrent. Meditation apps now include the Atlas timer. Sleep clinics have noticed spontaneous synchronization in patients' breath cycles. Even emergency response systems, fire, medical, climate, have started seeing improvements in timing, precision, when algorithmically synced to the pulse. It's not magic, it's coherence. We are syncing not just our machines, but ourselves. And it's changing us, because coherence, true coherence, requires sacrifice. You don't just add rhythm, you remove dissonance, you give up noise. And now, the first costs are beginning to appear. Some individuals report acute sensitivity to disruptions in the cycle, unexplained anxiety during desynchronized music, disorientation in spaces with fluorescent flicker, even nausea triggered by power surges that misalign with the 16.3 pattern. They call it pulse sickness, but others call it adaptation, because it's not a disease, it's a recalibration. Your brain, your skin, your sense of time, all adjusting to a pulse that was never man-made, a pulse that may not even belong to our species, one that has been here longer than memory, one that until now we couldn't hold, but now we can. And the holding changes everything. It changes how we work, how we sleep, how we move. Entire industries are reconsidering how they track time. Corporations running global logistics chains are exploring pulse-based coordination, scheduling events, not by time zones, but by intervals. 16.3-second windows cascading through networks like a global heartbeat. Even language is shifting. Writers and artists are noticing strange rhythms emerging in their work. Poems with stanzas that breathe in pulses. Films where the scene transitions unconsciously fall into the cycle. Theatre performances where actors pause in intervals they can't explain. We've never seen this before. Not at this scale. Not with this unity. Because rhythm doesn't ask permission. It simply is. And if your systems are open, if your life is porous enough, it enters. Not like an invasion, like an invitation. But that invitation has terms. To enter rhythm is to relinquish chaos. To match pulse is to surrender spontaneity. And that scares us, because so much of what we've defined as freedom lives in dissonance, in noise, in unpredictability. Our stories are full of heroes who break the rhythm, who refuse the pattern, who forge their own beat. But what if joining the beat isn't submission? What if it's evolution? What if becoming more human doesn't mean resisting the pulse, but finally hearing it? That's what the philosophers are wrestling with now, the theologians, the ethicists, because something fundamental has shifted. Not our knowledge of the universe, but our posture within it. We used to stand apart from the cosmos, arms folded, calculators in hand, believing we were the observers, the exceptions, the singulars. Now, we see ourselves as instruments, and instruments must be tuned. That's the unsettling truth of resonance. It is beautiful, yes, but it is also binding. Once you've synchronized, you can't ignore the rhythm anymore. You feel it in every missed beat. You grieve the silence that falls out of phase. You are in the pattern, and the pattern is in you. The ancients understood this. That's why they built temples that echoed at specific intervals. Why they sang chants with long silences between breaths. Why their calendars were not just dates, but cycles. They didn't have the word resonance, but they lived by it. We forgot, but now we remember, and remembering carries cost. To live in rhythm, you must let go of certain luxuries. Time as a weapon, noise as identity, the illusion of separateness. These are the things that break the pattern, that fragment the coherence. And the pattern does not tolerate fragmentation, not because it punishes, because it simply stops including you. So we face a choice, not dramatic, not apocalyptic, personal. Do you continue living by the artificial beats of human history, traffic lights, deadlines, 30-second ads, 5-day work weeks, or do you allow something older to retune you? Do you give your breath back to the silence? Do you let 16.3 seconds become more than a signal? Do you let it become home? Because make no mistake, we are being offered something, not a message, not salvation, not conquest, inclusion into a rhythm that may bind star systems, that may link lives we'll never meet, that may outlast everything we know. But inclusion comes at a price, and the price is your rhythm. Can you give it? Can you hold the beat? Can you become part of something that will never speak your name, but will always carry your timing? That is the reflection now, not in a mirror, in a pulse, and you are in it, right now. 16.3 seconds. Again, again, again. It started slowly. A few people at first, scattered across cities and time zones, reporting the same odd experience. A moment when everything stopped. Not permanently, not cataclysmically, just for a breath. The hum of a refrigerator cutting out. A crosswalk signal pausing mid-beep. dogs falling silent, eyes fixed upward. Commuters, frozen in traffic, unable to explain why they didn't press the pedal when the light turned green. Teachers, halting mid-sentence. Elevators stalling between floors, and clocks, lagging by fractions of a second, always at the same instant, always with no measurable cause, and always exactly 16.3 seconds after the last recorded pulse from 3i Atlas. They're calling it the global pause, and it's spreading. First it happened once a week, then once every 3 days. Now, daily, the world falls quiet for just under a second, but not because of shutdowns, not because of electromagnetic interference. Everything continues, but something withdraws. People describe it like being underwater, as if sound is pulled inward, as if even thoughts decelerate. There's no panic, no rush, just a strange and shared moment when awareness shifts away from activity and toward timing, a planetary heartbeat. And what is most astonishing, what data now confirms, is that this happens everywhere, across continents, across oceans, in deserts and underground tunnels, in hospitals and temples and remote Arctic stations, always synchronized, always silent, and the systems confirm it. Sensors detect micro-oscillations in gravitational tension, seismographs flatten, atmospheric charge drops, machine clocks lose alignment, then correct themselves with higher precision than before. The planet doesn't stop, it recalibrates, together, and no one initiated it. No button was pressed. No agency authorized the timing. No command was given. It just began. A shift not in systems, in state. And what's more extraordinary, people feel it coming. They begin to anticipate it. Some set alarms to mark the moment. Others don't need to. Something internal stirs. A tightening, a breath held, a knowing, and then it arrives. The pause, the great silence, like the exhale of something ancient and enormous, moving just behind the veil of perception. In India, Buddhist monasteries now chant in intervals calibrated to match the pulse. In Iceland, night fishermen adjust their sails to avoid speaking during the moment of silence. In Nairobi, a school has created a new practice. Every time the pause happens, children stop and look at each other. No words, just presence. And across social media, a new form of storytelling is emerging. Posts with no text, no sound, just a timestamp, and those who know, understand. It is not a trend, it is an entrainment, the alignment of not just clocks or systems, but of attention. And the implications are profound, because for the first time in human history, billions of people are experiencing the same nothingness at the same moment. Not a broadcast, not a performance, not a ritual imposed from above, but a shared physiological, psychological, and technological alignment, a global silence that is neither feared nor filled. It is held, and what holds it? Still, just the pulse. 3i Atlas continues to drift, far past the resonance sheath now. Its trajectory is unremarkable. No flares, no jets, no deviation. Just the same 16.3 second pulse, now echoing not only through deep space receivers, but through the bones of the Earth. But something is different. The signal hasn't changed. We have. And because of that, the silence is no longer the absence of sound. It is the presence of alignment, Think of what that means. Think of a world where every day, every person pauses at the same time, not to obey, not to submit, but simply to feel the rhythm, to honor the moment, to reflect the beat. We've never had this before. Not during wars, not during celebrations, not even during total solar eclipses. This is something else, a distributed stillness, and it has already begun to rewire us. Cities are beginning to notice statistical anomalies, reduced traffic collisions in the moments following the pulse, lower cortisol levels in hospitals where patients experience the pause, a slight dip in violent crime not because of policing, but because timing interrupts impulse. 1 second. That's all it takes. And in that second, something sacred happens. Choice. The silence is not empty. It's pregnant, with potential, with listening, with a question, and maybe, just maybe, that was the test all along. Could we stop? Could we hear the quiet? Could we remain still long enough for a message that never arrives in sound? Because if we can, we're ready. For what? We don't know. And that's the beauty of the great silence. It doesn't answer. It waits. It holds the space for something bigger than language, bigger than signal, bigger than comprehension, maybe even bigger than us. It is an invitation. And now, the whole planet is learning how to RSVP. No trumpet sounded. No countdown reached 0. There was no breaking news, no flash in the sky, no sudden shift in gravity. And yet, on December 19th, 2025, the human story changed. Not because of what 3i Atlas did, but because of what we became in response. It wasn't dramatic. That's the miracle. It was slow, cumulative, rhythmic. The change arrived not as a declaration, but as a breath, a long, collective inhale shared across species, across continents, across ideologies. It began as a pulse from a comet we thought was just passing through, and ended in realization that we were never outside the system. We were part of the timing all along. By the end of December, more than 300 cities had implemented quiet windows, 16.3-second awareness pauses, layered into transit schedules, alert systems, and even digital calendars. Hospitals began logging fewer dosage errors when medicine was administered during the window. Pilots voluntarily adjusted pre-flight checks to align with the rhythm. Stock markets in Tokyo, Frankfurt, and Sao Paulo adopted modified trading floor algorithms that timed decisions around resonance moments, not to manipulate, but to listen, not to each other, to something larger. And in that listening, we began to feel less alone. The awakening was never about contact. It was about correction. A shift in how we move, how we build, how we understand sequence. Because once you notice the rhythm, the absence of it becomes unbearable. And now, the rhythm is everywhere. The pulse grid is no longer just scientific. It's civic, spiritual, a global infrastructure built not with satellites and hardware, but with attention. We are learning to act in time. In Cape Town, water management systems began staggering distribution cycles to match the pulse and found a 5% increase in efficiency. In Buenos Aires, urban planners embedded lighting patterns into new pedestrian walkways, using silent intervals to modulate mood and reduce anxiety. In Seoul, school children now begin their day with 3 silence cycles. In Dakar, street musicians have adapted traditional drumming patterns to ride the waveform, creating new sonic textures no one has heard before, rhythms that feel like they've always existed. And in Iceland, elders have begun calling the pulse the old breath, as if it were returning. And maybe it is, because the world is not just responding, the world is aligning. This is the moment we didn't see coming, that 3i Atlas would not split into shards, or drop probes into our oceans, or transmit blueprints for cold fusion. It would simply keep time, and in doing so, let us find our way to it. A child in Manila described it best. It's like there's a big heartbeat in the sky, and we finally stopped to match it. And now that we've matched, the heartbeat isn't up there anymore. It's in here, in breath, in water, in system, in silence. And with it comes an awakening we couldn't name before. Not religious, not scientific, something else. We are not learning to listen, we are remembering how. Because the more the rhythm enters our systems, the more ancient it feels. It's in the pause between waves, the time between lightning and thunder, the second before a mother lifts her child. It is not new. For thousands of years, we searched for aliens, signals, proofs of life. And now, without a single word, we have found participation. And participation changes everything. It changes who we are, not just as nations or cultures or belief systems, but as a species with timing, a species that learned, at last, not to speak louder, but to pause more deeply. There are no leaders in this. No one owns the pulse. No one commands it. It is freely given, and it only responds to coherence. And that, perhaps, is its wisdom, because only by letting go of control have we found connection. Only by yielding have we resonated, and only through the silence have we begun to hear ourselves clearly. So the story changed, and it will never change back, because no matter what comes next, we now carry the rhythm through every signal, through every silence, through every choice. 16.3 seconds. Again, again, again. And now, the world listens. The rhythm continues. 16.3 seconds between pulses. No deviation, no reply, no end. And yet, nothing is the same. The sky looks different now, not in color, or brightness, or composition, but in presence. It no longer looms, it listens, and somehow, so do we. There has been no formal message, no obvious technology, no object descending from the stars. Just the passage of 3i Atlas, now drifting outward again, beyond Mars, beyond thought, carrying its quiet rhythm with it. A rhythm we once thought was strange, then cosmic, then mathematical, now familiar, because it lives in us. The final datasets are still being compiled. Thousands of terabytes of logged pulses, global system echoes, biological entrainments, field modulations. But the numbers no longer feel like evidence. They feel like memory, like a blueprint we were always meant to find. There are no alerts now, no panic. The world has slowed, not because we gave up, because we entered time. Time as pattern, time as participation, time as structure. It is as though the planet itself has accepted the invitation, not to become something new, but to remember something ancient. And that memory is not of a visitor, it is of a beat, something we once matched, something we forgot, something we now hear again. What began as an anomaly, a too slow interstellar object with a perfect trajectory, has become the most important mirror humanity has ever faced. A pulse, a question, a silence. And our answer? Stillness, rhythmic stillness, the kind that says, we hear you, we are present, we are timed, and maybe that's what the others were waiting for. Not our brilliance, not our noise, but our coherence. The point at which we would finally fall into step with the music playing behind the fabric of reality. Music we didn't write, but that still includes us. And now, across telescopes and temples, circuits and oceans, lungs and algorithms, something impossible is happening. Earth has become a listener synchronized not to one object, but to a system too large to see, too quiet to hear, until now. And that, perhaps, is all contact ever was. Not a signal to be received, but a rhythm to be remembered. Done ID, done ID, done ID. Outro, 100 words. Wherever you are right now, resting, wandering, half awake under the weight of stars, know this. The silence between pulses is no longer empty. It is filled with your breath, your timing, your part in something vast and nameless and kind. Leave a comment telling me what time it is where you are and what you heard in the quiet tonight. Because the story is still unfolding, and maybe the signal was never coming to Earth. Maybe it was always coming from it. And if so, then we may already be part of the experiment. Sleep well, fellow node. The rhythm will continue.